Good afternoon, everybody. Hi. It's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Max Brooks. Max is the son of Mel Brooks and Ann Bancroft, who are well known to all of us here. He's considered the world's foremost zombie preparedness expert. Anybody get out of school to come to this brief? Look, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, wonderful. Well, my son wants to come at 5 o'clock. I wouldn't let him out of school. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War, which some of you are familiar with. And his latest release is a Zombie Survival Guide, Recorded Attacks. The reason he's here is because I think he truly understands the potential for global crisis and just how unprepared we might be. Max Brooks.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you. One last time, you're sure you got the right guy? All right, I just have this vision of another Max Brooks with PhDs and battle stars wandering around a Star Trek convention saying, I think I'm in the wrong place. Before I begin, are there any Brits or Canadians? Good, so we can say World War Z. All right, and not Zed. Yes, I have written a book called World War Z, and it's called An Oral History of the Zombie War. What it really should be called is World War Z, insert real plague here. Because what I tried to do was make it a metaphor for the threats that we will be facing, and the threats that we're facing right now. Zombies, to me, were always a great metaphor because they're the only monster that come to you. You know, when you go see a horror film, it's always a group of teenagers, and they go somewhere, and something kills them. And you can always say, well, fine. Shouldn't have gone there in the first place. I didn't ask you to go up to the summer camp. But zombies come to you when you're minding your own business. And I think that is something uniquely American. I think that we really do believe, and I'm not talking about all of you, I'm talking about me, civilians. We really do believe that if we mind our own business and are nice, then everybody's going to leave us alone, and we'll be just fine. Now, unfortunately, we have the collective memory of a sand flea. And this happens all the time. I was speaking before, I grew up in Southern California. And it doesn't just mean international politics. Every couple of years in Southern California, fires come in, rage through the entire state, do more damage to the state of California than the Japanese ever did to us in World War II and would have loved to have done to us. Then once that has happened and millions of dollars have been lost, and in some cases lives have been lost, every time some government official gets on TV and says, wow, we never saw that coming. Really, 2 years ago you didn't see that coming. It happens every 2 years. And I think this is a problem, that we don't learn from our history, and we don't learn from anybody's history. What I tried to do in this book is present an oral history of a great catastrophe, of a plague that has swept around the planet. And one of the critics of it say, well, there's no main character. And what I say to them is, yes, the main character is the human race. Because we are so intertwined now that we cannot afford to be ignorant. I think that every country has national cultural strengths and weaknesses. And I think one of our weaknesses, one that we have to address as a nation, is our isolationism. And that's fine. If you study history, of course we're isolationist, and that was a good thing. Sometimes isolationism can create wonderful accomplishments. If you look at our recent presidential election, the rest of the world thought we could never do that. Why? Because no one else has done it. And if you've ever lived and worked around the world, you'll see that a lot of other countries, not all of them, but a lot of them have this attitude of, we can't do something new because no one else has ever done it. So that's a good part about being sort of stuck in our own heads, is we think of something, we go out and do it. The downside is we tend to ignore the rest of the world, which would be fine if the world didn't ignore us. And they don't. The term, I think, the world's policeman is overused, and I don't think it's accurate. We're not the world's policeman. We are the world's landlord. And by that, I mean whenever something breaks anywhere, somehow we're supposed to fix it. And it's true. If any of you have ever lived in an apartment building, something breaks, you call the landlord, he comes up, he says, your fridge isn't plugged in. Why didn't you just plug it in? And you say, well, you're the landlord. Plug it in. Plugs it in, and he says, all right. And then we blame him for not plugging it in if something else breaks. And I think that's the problem. I've always said when the Soviet Union collapsed, we had this collective national face like this. When what we should have looked like is this. Because with the collapse of communism, we would be the only superpower, and therefore the only one to blame for everything. And what I tried to do in World War Z was discuss how everything is combined. Because we live in a planet where, I guess the best metaphor, and it's fitting I should be at here, is we literally are all in the same boat. Those of you who are naval officers, all right, you guys know that if you're on a ship and somebody punches a hole in it, it might not be your department, but that ship's going down if you don't patch it. And I think that's the world we live in today. Environmental issues can become economic issues, which can then become social issues, which can then, unfortunately, become political issues, which can then morph into military issues. I think, unfortunately, and I've mentioned this in World War Z briefly, sometimes a lot of ideas get hijacked by extremist groups on the right or the left, and they get so perverted that we forget where the idea initially came from. I mean, nowadays, the idea of global warming is exclusively on the left. And when you think of global warming, somehow we're all supposed to think of a polar bear drowning because the ice is gone. Well, maybe the polar bear doesn't drown. Maybe the polar bear is out of a job. And the polar bear gets radicalized. And the polar bear discovers his religious beliefs, and the polar bear blames the United States. And the polar bear seeks revenge. Now, obviously, this is not a polar bear. But if this were to happen in a country like Bangladesh, which gets flooded and creates millions of unemployed, desperate, angry, ashamed young Muslim men, and this is important, shame, men who can't feed their families, men who come home every day and don't feel like men, and their shame turns into anger, and they need someone to blame. And there's only one superpower left. And it's all because the polar ice caps have melted. He doesn't know that. All he knows is that we're the only superpower left, and somehow it must be our fault. And this is what I tried to get through in World War Z, is to talk about how everything is connected, and problems that we might not understand will morph into other problems. If I say there's been a water crisis in Southern California, what does that mean? It might not mean anything. But it might mean that therefore urban development is going to take precedence over agriculture. California, the breadbasket of the western United States. So then if agriculture is pushed out, it's got to get pushed out somewhere cheaper, where water is cheaper, to another country that doesn't have the same kind of safety standards, another country that could import infected food into the United States, and infected food accidentally on a good day and perhaps purposefully poisoned on a bad day. In World War Z, I talk about the logistics of this planet and how trade is so important. You know, nowadays, there's been a recent Gallup poll that say that most Americans want to return to isolationism. And they want to say, we need to disengage, bring the troops home. Well, what troops are we talking about? Are we just talking about our military? Because whether those troops are there or here, it doesn't matter. We are engaged. There's no country in the world that isn't dependent on another country right now. And that means when we are engaged, there are going to be crises. And we can't wait for those crises, as I use the metaphor for zombies, to literally come bashing down our door. What I was trying to get through in this book is that we must engage, and we must engage politically and socially and economically. We can't just stand back and turn on the TV and then when there's a crisis suddenly send in the Marines and expect them to clean everything up. And the last 8 years have taught us that. It's that you cannot keep sticking your nose into these messes and then expect the military to bail you out. I mean, this happens, like I said, this happens to us constantly with our lack of memory. We get involved in these countries, of which we know practically nothing about. And then we say, wow, they didn't greet us as liberators. Well, I mean, they did for 12 hours, and then they expected the water to be turned on, and the electricity, and the roads, and the garbage, and their neighbors to stop defecating on their lawns, and wow, they don't really like us anymore. This is what I was trying to get through, that we must engage, and we must see the connections. If I can use the metaphor of the medical profession, a generation ago, if you had a debilitating disease, you would go to your general practitioner. And your general practitioner understood you. He understood how your body worked, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat. And then he went and found you a specialist. Nowadays, when people have a debilitating or possibly fatal disease, they go right to the specialist. And it's good for a specialist, but all they do is specialize. If you have cancer and you go directly to an oncologist, he's not going to ask you, well, do you have a heart condition? Do you have diabetes? What can you eat? What can't you eat? No, he's just going to say, well, what type of cancer do you have? And what type of chemo should I use? And that's it. And I think one of the problems that we're facing today is we've become over-specialized, but we haven't trained a class of general practitioners. We've got people who are getting better and better and more specific at what they do, and that's a good thing. Obviously, we need that, and we need more of it. But what we need is a whole other class of people who do nothing but look at connections. Because it's those connections that will either save us or destroy us. I'm not going to ask if anybody here has studied history because, it's not like it's going to repeat itself. But in World War II, the man who almost gave Hitler the world was not a general, but an admiral. And his name was Karl Donitz. What Donitz understood was war is not about armies fighting each other. The war is about logistics. Armies need bullets. They need food. They need medicine. How can I take all that away from my enemy? Donitz, who was in the Navy, originally came from the U-boat fleet. But back in the First World War, U-boats took out warships. Donitz said, wait a minute. Why do warships exist? They exist to protect maritime trade. Why would we waste time going after the sheepdogs when we should be going after the sheep? That's the point. What Donitz did was direct an entirely new type of warfare, undersea commerce raiding. And he did it brilliantly. And he almost won the war, to the point that Churchill, in his memoirs, said, the only threat I ever worried about was the U-boat threat. Donitz wasn't fighting a war of tactics and strategy and blood. He was fighting a war of economics. That's what he understood. The Japanese on the other side of the world didn't. And that was a real water war. And what if they had said the same thing? What if they said, wait a minute, this is about logistics. This is about bandages, beans, and bullets. I think that's the phrase, isn't it? That's what they used to say, bandages, beans, and bullets. What if the Japanese had said, we need to start going after their merchant ships? Forget the battleships and the aircraft carriers. They can't build those if they can't get the resources from point A to point B. Now that's just World War II, when that was a real conventional war. That was armies here and there. Now the line between peace and war is gone. There's no such thing anymore, where countries literally say, we're going to fight on this day, and then we'll fight, and then the war is over. No, there are now thousands of ways to hurt another country. And none of them have to do with killing your enemy. If I were to tell you right now, the Chinese are ensuring that the population of Southern California is going to be incapable of fighting the next war. You'd say, but how? What are they, spies? A Tom Clancy novel? No. The Chinese aren't doing this intentionally. But 20% of the smog in Southern California comes from Chinese coal-powered plants. And it's going across the jet stream, and it's landing right in my home city. And 10% of the lung capacity of the kids in my hometown is being crushed by that coal dust. This means that these kids are going to have health problems their entire lives, which means it's going to consume resources. Now, I don't have to tell a lot of you ground pounders. Anyone here Army, Marines? Well, you guys know the best way to fight an enemy is not to kill him, it's to wound him. You kill a guy, all he needs is a casket and a bugle, and that's it. But you wound someone, that's a tremendous amount of money, time, effort that could have been spent trying to kill the enemy, instead trying to keep someone alive. Now, the Chinese aren't doing this to the people of Los Angeles intentionally, but it is happening. That's an environmental issue, but it's also a national security issue. Imagine what would have happened in the 1980s when HIV was first discovered. Back then it was called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, because it was a gay disease. That's what people thought. Now imagine if they hadn't. Imagine if in the early 80s people had said, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with being gay or IV drug users. Yes, they're more risk, but we have a brand new virus which is deadly and silent and can lay dormant. And if we don't stop it, God knows where we'll be. Imagine if they had gone after it with the same veracity that they went after Ebola Reston. Anyone hear of Ebola Reston? Right, some of you were like, do I have to? Yes. Ebola Reston was discovered in Reston, Virginia in monkeys. And this is an example of global trade. Monkeys captured in the Philippines. Ebola doesn't come from the Philippines. Monkeys captured in the Philippines that were originally from Africa, that were captured as pets, brought to the Philippines, and then released. And somehow, Ebola mutated into an airborne virus. Now, we went after it like a house on fire, literally. They surrounded that building. They took care of it. Great, gone. We never have to worry about Ebola Reston again, probably. Probably. But imagine what would have happened if we had done that with AIDS. If that had happened, nobody here would know about it, maybe a few medical students. Oh yeah, there was that whole immune deficiency disease that we took care of it in the early 80s. But we didn't. We ignored it, we politicized it, and now something that has become, used to be a health issue or a moral issue, is now a national security issue. How much money do we spend on AIDS every year? How much money do we spend on foreign aid for countries with HIV? Where else could that money have gone? See, there's no secret that I'm from LA. I grew up on the liberal side. And all my life, I heard about every bomber you build, our schools we're not building. See, that was the whole thing, was you military-industrial complex, you're taking money that we could have built the country with. Okay, that cuts both ways. Of course we have to give money for AIDS. We have to. The genie's out of the bottle. But imagine if we didn't have to. How many special forces would we be training right now? How many ships? How many Predator drones? How many more seats would be filled right now if there was money for this? If you want to take out a country, there's a lot of ways. And blowing up some buildings, that's the least of your worries. In World War Z, I have something that's called the Great Panic, which is actually stage 2 of all viral outbreaks. Stage 1 in any viral outbreak, pandemic outbreak, is denial. No, it's not going to affect me. I'm not gay. Or if you're the Chinese diplomat in the 1980s, you would say, well, we don't have IV drug users in our country. Oh, we don't have homosexuals either, so AIDS is not a problem. Or if you're the Russian diplomat, any Russians here? Damn, I was looking forward to throwing that in your face. The Russian diplomat, who I'm not kidding, said, our genetic Slavic superiority makes us immune from AIDS. Wow. Well, that's how we dealt with AIDS, denial. Then, and some of you who are my age will remember this, we had the Great Panic. Oh my God, you can get it from a toilet seat. Oh my God, you can get it from a handshake. Oh my God, you can get it if you drive a Pinto. Whatever. AIDS is everywhere. And so then what you do is you waste a tremendous amount of resources doing the wrong thing. I mean, we've seen it in the War on Terror, where there was such a great panic that every state in the Union got equal amount of Homeland Security money. Really? North Dakota is as high a priority as Manhattan? Well, apparently so. That's what happens in panic. What I was trying to do in World War Z was bring people together in a connection and see how what could be an environmental crisis or a medical crisis or a social crisis of today will become a national security crisis tomorrow. If we have a pandemic in this country, it will suck up resources greater than any terrorist attack. How much money did we spend on H1N1? I don't know, but probably a lot. And I sure know that a lot of that is not getting put into fighting our enemies. If I were a terrorist, I wouldn't blow up a building. Blow up a building, it just gets blown up. That's it. No. I would make sure that just one child is infected with a brand new disease. It doesn't even have to be an easily catchable disease, because that's also how social relations go from denial to panic, is someone high up is infected. That happened, most of you won't remember this, but that happened with the AIDS epidemic with Rock Hudson. People said, oh my God, if he can get AIDS, then it's gettable. And that's what happens. If those children hadn't died of H1N1, it would just be another flu strain. This is what I'm trying to get through. This is what I was trying to do, is discuss that our society is so fragile, and the threads are so delicate and can be pulled, that we need to get back out into the world, and we need to stay in the world. And I know, it's very complicated and muddy. Anyone who's married knows what I'm talking about. It's very messy, and there's a lot of arguments, and it's also very delicate, and a lot of times it's not what you said, but the way you said it. And then you just go, and you want to just say, you know what, screw it. I'm getting divorced, I'm going to Vegas, I'm blowing my money on hookers. Don't worry about getting AIDS. That's, I'm Slavically superior, whatever. But that's sort of how we're feeling right now. The last 8 years, we sort of feel like we've had this really bad marriage with the world, and now we want a divorce. We want to say, enough, pull the troops home. To hell with you guys. Well, like I said before, we can ignore our enemies. They're not going to ignore us. And as former President Bush said, they're going to follow us home. Well, that's an oversimplification. It's not like, you know, GIs are going to come home from Baghdad and open their duffel bag and some guy's going to jump out. They don't need to follow us home. They need to sever our supplies of oil, food, clean water, H1N1 vaccines. Not all vaccines are made here in the US. All you need to do is start a viral plague here, make sure it's from another country. That country now because it's cheaper to make it, that country now has leverage over us. And this is what I was trying to do, is that we need people who do nothing but see connections. And this is going to be the future leaders. All of you naval officers have to think like Admiral Donitz. You have to think, well, what is the real enemy? How can we hurt them? How can they hurt us? And how can that all be done without firing a shot? When all of you read something in the news, you need to think, how is this a national security issue? How is everything a national security issue? the healthcare debate going on right now. So it's become about compassion and greed. Yes, it is about compassion or greed or government inefficiency, yes, but it's also about national security. If young people of today are too sick and their parents don't have the money to send them to college, who's going to lead our country? Education in this country. This has been something going on since I was a kid. Oh, education. Stay in school, kids, and just say no. That is a national security issue. If our kids don't have a proper education, how are they going to handle the technology of today's military? These are issues that we have to deal with. Somebody has to be in the room with our leaders and says, Mr. President or Mr. Secretary or somebody with a nicer suit than me, this can affect our national security, and let me tell you how. So that's what I was trying to get through, is we need more general practitioners. And you're going to hear this tomorrow. We're going to have an amazing panel of people much smarter than me. I'm not a specialist. I'm just a guy who thinks about connections. Have I rambled enough, or can we open the floor for questions? All right. At this point, thank you for having me. Other than signing a woman's cleavage at a convention, this has probably been the greatest honor of my career. Any questions? Yes.
Sir, I'm only halfway through your book. It's great. It's scary. A lot of things are going wrong. It's very dark. It's very negative. How can things go right? It seems like with the crisis so far, again, I'm only halfway through, bringing out the worst in everybody.
Yes.
What about the Gandhis and what about the message?
It's ironic that this woman in World War Z, she says she's halfway through and things are pretty dark. And the irony is, I get a lot of criticism from horror fans. And when I say my core, this is my core fan base, by the way. My core fan base, people, they live with their mothers. Haven't really actually touched a woman yet, but they'd like to someday. They'll curse at you in Klingon. And they give me a lot of flack because they say that my book is too rosy. Because it isn't about the end of the world. It's about, in the end, we do triumph at a horrific cost, but we do. We don't just go into the darkness. And this is what I say to people, and is that the point of the book is that civilization is artificial. It's not a God-given right. Civilization is something that we all came together millions of years ago, or depending on which part of the world or the country you live, thousands of years ago, and we created civilization. And it's not a stone monolith. It's a tree, and it's a tree that must be tended or it will die. And therefore, you have to have a positive attitude. See, those people in my world, the civilians who wander around saying, we're screwed, life is terrible. No, they don't really believe that. If they believe that, they would go home and off themselves. It's true. Sorry, my wife's calling me. I think she'll understand. That's it. One of you here. You mentioned the cleavage.
She's trying to just stop talking about how you guys met.
That's right. Oh, that's a great, yeah. But the point is that you have to have a positive attitude, because those people who really do believe that we're screwed, they don't believe that. If they did, they would go home and boom. No, they believe that they're actually safe. The ones who dress in black and listen to The Cure and are really gothed out, no, they think that it is just an indestructible birthright, that everything is going to be okay. And I also get a lot of criticism from the right, who say, you criticize this country. Yeah. It's called a democracy. It's what you have to do. We have to be critical. Now, there's critical where you say, oh, it's never going to get better, it's innately evil. And I have no time for those people. But then there's the kind of criticism that's born out of love. If a friend of yours is an alcoholic, you don't say, yeah, no, that's grape juice. Here are the keys to my car. No, you tell them, you got a problem. We need to fix it. And that's the good thing about democracies. We do need to sit around and have honest, frank discussions where, and pardon my French, we piss each other off. But that's the only way we're going to get to the truth. We need to be able to say, wow, how did we screw up in the last 8 years? And how do we do something right? Maybe there's both. So, to answer your question, it gets better. Anyone else? Yes?
So how much of when you were preparing to write the book, how much was directed research into the different themes that you tied together? And how much was just either a natural or a learned ability that you have to see these kind of connections you're talking about?
That's a good question. Well, it's both. I always look at connections. That's just the way I think. But as far as the research, it was a lot of homework. The writing was nothing. The writing took me a couple months. The research took years because I wanted to get it right. Everything in World War Z, because I'm a history major by profession, is based on something that really happened. Everything in the book. I didn't make up anything. I was lucky enough to have friends with real jobs, like some of you, that I could call and I could bounce ideas. And I said, hey, well, here's a hypothetical scenario. Could it happen? And sometimes they would say, no, that's really way out. Or they would say, yeah, that really could happen. And so I think maybe that's why people find the book so frightening is I didn't make anything up. That's why I didn't make zombies supernatural in it. I wanted to make it as real as humanly possible because I wanted to make the kind of book where you could take it out and you could substitute anything you wanted. And incidentally, people ask me about, is it post-Katrina? No, there's a part in the book which is very Katrina-esque. I wrote it before Katrina. And I thought I was going to get criticism on it because let's be honest, before Katrina, if I had said, look, there's going to become a big storm and it's going to wipe out an American city and the president's national security advisor is going to go shoe shopping on that day and then go see Spamalot. You'd laugh me out of my profession. You'd be like, wow, you don't deserve my money. This is another main criticism I get, which is people say, well, this would never happen because people always do the right thing in crises. These are the people who live with their mothers, by the way. Really? And sometimes you just can't argue. But I say, look, everything in World War Z was based on some prior human foible. Go look it up. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I have finished the book. It's interesting that half U.S. society, global society, crumbled. Yet the U.S. military in your book is asked to do horrific things in terms of the population, segregate, triage, turn its weapons on itself when recovering the country. And yet the military seems not to be affected by the same breakdown. Cohesion is maintained, command and control is maintained. There are incidents with your canine corps that suggest there's stresses, but by and large, the military forces of the United States do not break faith. Why?
Well, they actually, the question is, why doesn't my book, The Military, break faith? Well, they do and they don't. I have the Battle of Yonkers, in which the U.S. Army is confronting the living dead. And now, and this for you Army guys, I know I'm straying into real fiction, where there's actually been mistakes made leading up to the battle. Somehow the chain of command has gotten a little verkauft, as we say in my world. And things don't go according to plan. And I know, what do I know? I'm just a civilian. Things always go according to plan in war. But what is the breaking point is not military. It's emotional. Is that it's the reason that you're not allowed to scream fire in a crowded theater. Because panic is the most infectious emotion. It's genetic. Let's face it, folks. I don't care if you believe in evolution or not. It's true. And we spent most of our evolution running for our lives from everything out there to the point that fear and panic is in our bones. And you military guys know this. You know that most of your basic training is all about getting rid of panic. That's why they train you guys so much, is so when you get in combat, your muscles are like, I know what to do. I've done this before. Because panic can destroy us. And in Yonkers, it does. But one thing, what's great about America is, man, do we know how to rebound. We've had crises that would have destroyed other nations, that they never would have recovered from. And we keep rebounding. So, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a little rosy, but I do believe we can rebound. Yes.
If I can follow up.
Yes, you may follow up.
Yonkers is a defeat. We've lost at Kasserine, we've lost at Task Force Smith. Military units north and south in the Civil War panicked and ran. But the command and control facilities of the United States military are not effective. In Katrina, the police forces of New Orleans stopped being functional to all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
The government of Louisiana, to some degree, did so as well.
Oh, yeah.
We postulate that we have that on a national scale, and yet, while other things fall apart, there's still enough resiliency. What makes the military not do that?
Well, in my book, I have that the president steps down and his VP takes over. And those of you, who's read the book, by the way? All right. Those of you who haven't, I'm going to ruin it for you. Because some of you are going to read it if you do, and you're going to be like, wow, who would he pick as the president? Colin Powell. I have had a little bit of military experience. I'm quite proud of my semester in Army ROTC. They say that the military makes you learn about yourself, and I have learned. I learned apparently that my feet point in the opposite direction. So when I run, my back turns to jello. I also learned that I shoot left-handed, by the way, which I didn't know till I got on the rifle range and those M16 brass casings kept hitting me in the head. And I learned that I can, even the best of you leathernecks, I can out dry heave you any day. But I was in Army ROTC during Desert Storm. Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And I remember Powell's words. And I remember thinking, this guy really cares. This guy really cares about his men. And I became sort of a Powell biographer fanboy. And I've read his books and I've read everything about him. And I thought, if we were ever in a crisis and this guy stepped up, yeah, he's the right man at the right place at the right time. Because I don't subscribe to the attitude that great times make great men. And history's proven me right. I do believe a lot of it is luck if you don't have the right guy in the right place at the right time. So we happen to. So that's one of the reasons the military rebounded. I also believe that there's just something in the American spirit, that we are insanely optimistic. We'll take any punch and we will just keep getting back up. I mean, I remember when I was a little kid, in the 80s, oh my God. I mean, and then the crisis of the early 90s, we thought America was finished. We thought, well, that's it. Hello, Great Britain. Who, by the way, they've seemed to have rebounded too. Go figure. When I was a kid, the whole country was one big Smith song. But I do believe that we can rebound. See, everybody at my age got that. Everybody a little older is like, the Smiths? What's that? Like Pete Seeger? No. I do believe there is something in our national spirit that rebounds us. Anyone else? Yes.
I was wondering, the episode where the pilot crash lands in the south, and then she's talking to another woman who's in the area, and she makes it out to doing it resting. What were you trying to convey with that? I know that it was a cool story, and also me and my husband were debating whether or not, she's talking about the other, or there's actually a real person. But I was just curious, what was your intended meaning in that?
Yeah, I think what I was trying to go for with that, which is basically behind enemy lines. And I think whenever I read a good war story, like a big war story, there's always stories of what it's like to be behind enemy lines. Incidentally, World War Z's book. It's based on a book by Studs Terkel called The Good War. Anybody who makes war your business should read it. It's an oral history of World War II. And it's not just American John Wayne. It's every country, every aspect. And it really gives you a global, holistic perspective of what it means to be in a war. And so that's what I was trying to go through. What is it like to be behind enemy lines? And I don't know, any flyers here? Anybody ever been behind enemy lines? Good. You have?
No, I was going to ask a question.
Oh, well, ask.
You want to give me credit for that?
Sure, yes, sir. Ask away.
First, congratulations to your dad on the Kennedy Center honors.
Thank you.
He's done great work all these many years.
Thank you. Yeah, we just came from the Kennedy Center, by the way, so my dad was just honored.
Secondly, I'm an advocate of airships, and I was interested to see that you used dirigibles to fight zombies. Where did that notion go?
Well, I use dirigibles because I just thought, well, you need airships. I mean, you need aircraft, but you need aircraft in this kind of war. You need an aircraft that's going to stay aloft for a lot of time. In this war, you also don't have that much fuel. And that was a big issue in my war is, for some strange reason, I predicted that we would have an energy crisis. So I thought, well, what would you do there? How would you adapt? How would the military adapt? And that's how they did. I have a whole section, for those who haven't read it, about military adaptation. I give the Marines a lot of credit because, I mean, let's face it, those of you who are Marines understand that your tanks have to go through admirals. And so a lot of times in our history, Marines have had to adapt. And they sort of become the spearhead of how the military adapts. Anyone else? Yes?
You mentioned that you're good at connections, and I was curious about how that came to be and how we might replicate that amongst other things. Now, you're genetically wired to think of the right
No.
side of your brain. What was your major in college?
Well, I actually might be wired to think that way. I'm painfully dyslexic. And it actually, had it not been for a history professor of mine, I probably would have been just a high school dropout. I had a history professor, and let's face it, history is the most boring subject ever. Math looks interesting next to history. No, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that's how most people perceive it. Most people in this country, history, they go, history. Oh, like when Rihanna got beat up. No. The other day, my cousin, she rented Starsky and Hutch, and I was like, it's a good movie, right? It's almost as good as of the TV show. And she's like, there was a TV show? So history is very boring for most people. But I had a professor who didn't teach, I mean, he did. He taught the when and the where and the how and the who. But most importantly, he taught the why. He made history about motive. And his main theme was, we're still doing the same stuff that we've done at the beginning. The tools have changed, the places, the names, but the human motives of why people do the things they do have always been the same. So my connection was actually made from past to present. That anything that happens now has already happened. And that's got me thinking of how to connect things. And I guess that from then on, that is sort of where my mind went. And I think that's really important. I think history I think anyone going into public service should take several history courses and be locked in a room and not allowed out until they have finished their courses because, America, we're 200 years old. And that's nothing. It's nothing. Countries like India and China, they go, oh, 200, that's so cute.
Follow-up.
Yeah.
It's one thing to see connections in terms of time from the past to present. But what about connections in the present in terms of how you see, as you say, an economic crisis as an environmental crisis, or social crisis, or crisis of national security? How do you see those links across? How do you come to develop that capacity?
I think I do it because I think I initially did it for me, as compensation for my dyslexia. Because I used to screw up facts and figures. I used to literally take letters and jumble them together and mix up numbers. So details were always hard for me. To this point, I'm still going over details. When I wrote World War Z, I hired out of my own pocket a fact checker. I said, go back and make sure I got it all right. And to prove me right, that my dyslexia will always be my demon, he said, yeah, no, you got it right. All the Chinese names, that town, this weapon system. I got a laser system so right that the guys who designed it have invited me to the plant. They said, you did better than most journalists. You know what I got wrong? A sporting goods store 2 blocks away from my apartment in New York. I put it on the wrong street. So I think in order to compensate for little details, I thought big. When I was in college, when I was in high school, I thought, okay, I'm never going to be the littlest minutia thinker in the room. I'm not going to be the best at that. So I got to have something. I got to have some leverage, something that makes me useful. So I thought, I will see the connections between them. Anyone else? In the back.
Books you make, it's a really interesting book, and the arguments that you present are very, or the ideas you present, particularly with regards to relationships and other issues, and how something happening in A affects someplace over
Interesting point. Well, all right. Anyone who has dreams of world empire, look what it did to Britain. There's a reason that whole country is one big Smith song. There actually, I mean, that's nothing, studying history. There did come a point towards the end of the 19th century where the British were like, oh, this ain't worth it, mate. And there's a reason why in 1945 they gave us the keys to the world. They were like, here, it's yours, take it, go, we're fine. No, India, go. Africa, go. Because they'd had enough. Because it's really hard. We can't even run ourselves. We literally have people storming our capital with signs saying, government, keep your hands off my Social Security. If we can't handle that, do we really want to try and run Africa? I think what we need is not so much world empire. I think we need closer cooperation, closer alliances. You know, we used to be really good at that. I don't know how we lost that. You know, if you watch a John Wayne movie, you think World War II was basically John Wayne versus a whole lot of Germans and some quasi-Asiatic actors pretending to be Japanese. World War II was fought by a grand alliance of many countries, and all of them were necessary. You know, even Venezuela, they were necessary. Yes, all of them. Because they all, even countries that didn't do a lot of fighting, brought resources to the table. Where do you think all our rubber came from? All came from Brazil. Everybody had a part in this. This is one thing that George Bush Sr. did brilliantly. In that Operation Desert Storm, that wasn't an American operation. For God's sakes, Argentina showed up. Which always made me wonder. I was like, wow, finally the guys always have the coup dictators with all the medals. Finally they can, real medals. They're really going to fight. It was a broad international coalition. Same thing, Korea. Korea was not an American war. Korea was a UN war. People say, get us out of the UN. We don't need the UN. We invented the UN. This is us. We are the ones who founded the idea of nations working together. And I think that's something that we need to do. And it's messy, and it's really complicated. And there's going to be a lot of countries out there that expect us to clean up their mess or just want to see us fall on their face. And they love that, which is what I think our President Obama said brilliantly at the UN, when he basically said, okay, if I'm paraphrasing. I don't think he's ever said okay in his life. Where he said, well, but he basically said, look, for the last 8 years, you've been on our case about going it alone. You know, we're imperialist, we're hegemonic, we're going it alone, we're going it alone, we're going it alone. Okay, we're not going alone anymore. We're going to listen to you. But you better ante up and kick in, because you don't have the right to have an opinion if you can't back it up. It's put up or shut up time. And I was so happy when he said that. And the way he handled the Latin countries when he was dealing with the crisis in Central America, the coup was Honduras. And he said, the very same countries who accuse us of doing nothing are also the same countries who accuse us of being imperialistic. You can't have it both ways. So I think we have a whole group of skills we need to learn. Sir, are you married, have a girlfriend? Okay, how many fights have you been in where you don't even know how you lost? She has taken your words and she remembers things that you did and the way you did them, and you're, We need to learn those skills. All right? We need to be able to say, you know, oh yeah, Sri Lanka? Well, we remember in 1968 when you did this. And it's not just what you did, it's the way you did it. See, this is our problem. We've had this attitude towards the UN where we just go, yeah, whatever. We're the dude. You know, we go, and they're arguing, and we go, We need to be able to turn around and be like, no, we've done our homework. We've done our homework. We get it now. You know, when someone accuses, I mean, look, do you know how many times when I was a kid going to Europe, having a Frenchman try to get on my case about Vietnam? And that wasn't the problem. Do you know what it was like to have other American kids, other American students go, yeah, that was pretty bad in Vietnam. We should, yeah. And I'd be like, what? French Indochina? And they'd be like, oh, is that near Vietnam? Oh! I mean, this is unfortunately what we do. We don't educate our young people, then we send them out into the world as ambassadors of lameness. And so no world empire. I don't want to be responsible for the plumbing in Luanda. But we do need to become as much of a student of them as they are of us. Because here's the thing. The problem with the global village, remember in the early 90s was a term now, global village. Well, the problem with the global village is a lot of people are waking up realizing that they're in the global village's ghetto. And now with media, we are broadcasting these images of our wealth, our power, our society. And people in the global village are looking up on the hill seeing that mansion. But we're not looking down into the slum. And we need to do that. There's just so many times you can drive slowly through the ghetto in a rich convertible before you get carjacked. So this is what I mean is we need to engage. Because you better believe, when I learned to memorize my wife's actions, and when she tries to argue and I go, oh yeah, what about the time you did that? And the way you said it, and she goes, yeah, you're right. And, you don't gloat. You go, well, what's important, is we've learned to work together. And then you go behind closed doors and you're like, but behind closed doors we can gloat, but that's what we need to do. We say, yes, the UN, well, I'm glad we're working together. Anyone else?
The resource to kill.
Oh, the resource to kill ratio I invented in World War Z because I was trying to get through to my audience that war is not a first-person shooter game. That there is a little thing called logistics and resources. And I have learned this from studying history, and I've learned this from studying not us, but our enemies. We have had a plethora of resources, and we have had the greatest logistical train in the world. Nobody does combat logistics like the US. We invented it in the Civil War, and we've been doing it ever since, and man, can we do it. And I think we need to be aware. I was trying to get the readers to be aware of that. Anybody been to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.? Anyone ever see that German surface-to-air missile, the guided surface-to-air missile that they've got, the radio-controlled? You know what the fins are made out of? Wood. They didn't have enough metal to make that. So they had to use wood, all right? That's what I'm talking about, is that kind of resource. You learn from your enemies, and you learn that we live in a world of logistics, and if you just don't have it, you're going down. It's that simple. I mean, we're learning, we're just talking about in your war game department, about how in the interwar years, that if we're going to fight a war with Japan, it ain't going to be with battleships and aircraft carriers. For every one of those, we need a lot of supply ships and a lot of oilers, a lot of AKs. We need a lot, not AK-47s, the transports. We need a lot of stuff. And this is the thing today, is we can't fight a war today, an industrialized war, because we don't make our own stuff. Nobody makes their own stuff. Obama just went over to China and was just criticized because he didn't criticize the Chinese on human rights enough, whereas Bill Clinton just railed into them. Well, when Bill Clinton went over there, we had less trade with China than we had with Portugal. Now, China and America, we're married. And there's just so much leverage we can have over them anymore. Resource to kill. This is another thing, is if you're going to fight a war, I was going to say the downside of our great logistical train is sometimes we become too dependent on it. If there's 4 Viet Cong in a village with knives and punji sticks, we'll bring in a B-52. And I think sometimes we need to learn to fight smarter instead of to fight richer. And this is what I mean, is, education, education's expensive. No, it's not. Books are cheap. Internet's cheap. We can fight smarter. We can learn. So that's where resource to kill ratio came from. Anyone else? How am I doing on time, by the way, Admiral? We're about out of time. All right. Time for one more? Or? All right, thank you, everybody.